Welcome back to DAG High Performance, and today I'll be showing you how to remove and install a rear wheel on your dirt bike. Here's the tools that we'll be working with today. We have a 32mm socket, we have a 12mm open-ended wrench for those chain tensioner bolts, we have a 10mm, and then we have our little breaker bar and a torque wrench to torque it back to spec when we're done. Alright, first thing we're going to do, we're going to break this rear axle nut loose. So we're going to break this loose, and this thing on here, this is my flag holder. This is what I put my flag in at the sand dunes. Alright, now that we got the rear axle nut off, we can break this loose. These little tensioners. So we're going to break it loose and then screw it in a little bit. Do the same thing on the sprocket side. Break it loose. Okay, now that we got those things loose and the axle nut off, I like to lift the tire up a little bit, and then we're just going to jiggle this out. Oh, and we don't want to lose our axle block. Okay, so now we're just going to push the tire forward a little bit so that our chain gets loose, and then we're going to be able to roll it back. Okay, we're going to want to make sure we take our spacers out of our hub because we're going to need to transfer these to the other rim. Okay, so now that we have all this stuff off, I just want to take advantage of wiping all the sand off that got on them, that is residue from riding at the sand dunes. Make sure we want to have these nice and clean when we put them back on the bike. So I'm going to wipe those off, and then we'll be ready to install our dirt tire. Remember our spacers, we don't want to forget those, or else our wheel is going to be loosey-goosey in the back. Now I just like to turn them while I push them in, that way the seal lip is nice and even all the way around, because sometimes it will fold over and then you don't get a good seal for your bearing. Okay, so we got all our parts clean, we got our tire here, and we're ready to put it back on. So we're gonna move around this brake caliper, and before we get too comfortable, we're gonna make sure our chain is how we want it. So we want this on top of the swing arm, that way that can lay over the top of the sprocket for us, because if we have it drooping down, there's going to be no way to get that back into place. So then I like to lift it up a little bit, swing my chain over, and then I like to roll it and get the chain on, and then I don't have to worry too much about if the wheel is going to move, because now the chain's on it. Now off camera, I applied some grease back to my rear axle, and then before you stick your rear axle in, make sure you put your axle block back in there, or else you're going to have a swell time figuring out that you can't put your axle block on when your axle's already in there. So see, when you have everything cleaned and you grease your shaft, it just slides right in, and you don't have to use a hammer, you don't have to beat it, and see, we're all the way in there. Okay, so now we can take our other axle block, put that in place, put our washer on, and then our rear nut. Now on this specific year and model for this Honda 450, the chain slack is 2.5 inches to 2 3/4 of an inch. So we gotta adjust our chain slack tensioners over here so that we can be within spec, because you don't want a loosey-goosey chain. So that's what we'll be doing now. So we just gotta spin these out, and then when we get to the slack we want, we use this lock nut right here to secure it. So another important thing to remember, if you look closely there, is these little lines on the swing arm, and this axle block has a notch on it. So whatever line the axle block lines up with, you just want to make sure you count those and match it on the other side. That way you know your wheel is straight. Okay, I got the chain slack to how I want it, and so I'm just going to snug these up. I don't like to put them super tight because they get a lot of dirt and grime in here, so they tend to lock themselves up. So you tend to roll this nut a lot, trying to break it loose to adjust your chain slack. Okay, so now we're ready to tighten our axle nut. And this is a little pro tip. So it's easy for the wheel to not be pressured against your chain tensioner. So what I like to do is I'll roll my wheel forward, put a rag in the chain, and then that shoves this axle block and the axle up against the chain tensioner. So that way you know you have good contact and that your wheel is not going to be walking on you. Okay, so now we're ready to torque this down to spec, which is 94 foot-pounds. So that's specific to this bike again. Every bike might be a little different, so just make sure you read what your torque spec is supposed to be so you can torque that properly. So you don't want your rear wheel falling off while you're riding, you know? Alright, so last thing we're going to do now is take our rag out. And I'm just going to apply some lube to my chain so I'm ready to ride. Thanks for watching on how to remove and install a rear wheel on a dirt bike. Please leave a like and a comment and subscribe. If you would like to see any specific tutorial videos, please leave it in the comments and I'll be sure to film those.